Hi, my name is Alejandro Pérez Pérez, and this is the AI Coffee Podcast. Every week, we will have one episode regarding one disruptive aspect of technologies for the time to drink a cup of coffee. Today we have Marta Carcajona Marta, who is a colleague in Fujitsu, and she has really an insightful background about genetic diagnosis by informatics. And we will discuss about how genetics is nowadays working with AI and working with data. So just for presenting her before we start the conversation, she has a bachelor degree in biology in Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. Then she studied a master's degree in bioinformatics and computational biology in the Spanish National School of Health. And she has a lot of experience regarding biomedical research and bioinformatics in several workplaces such as the Biomedical Research Institute in Madrid, the National Biotechnology Center, NIM Genetics, and as I said before, in Fujitsu. So welcome, Marta, to the iCoffee podcast. I start the conversation with a question. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you became interested in this specific intersection between bioinformatics, genetics, and data? And also, if you want, how can you define bioinformatics?
Hello, Alejandro. First of all, thank you very much for having me. My name, as you just said, is Marta Carcajona. I'm a bioinformatician in Fujitsu. And for talking about bioinformatics, I think I have to explain that there are two kinds of bioinformaticians. The ones that have a biomedical background and those with a computer science background. And mine, as you just said, I'm in the first group. I studied biology in La Autónoma de Madrid. And that's where I found my passion for genetics. I entered biology for the animals and I stayed for the genetics. The transition from genetics to computer science comes from me being a little bit of a geek. I've always been into computers and programming and such. So it was natural for me to get deeper into that world and transition to that. So I studied the Master of Bioinformatics that you already mentioned. Actually, for my first job in bioinformatics, the one in the CNB, my first actual job was actually related to bacteria. I helped upgrading a standard for plasmids. Plasmids are circular DNA that go in bacteria, okay? And I helped build an in silico design for plasmids. And after that, I got into NIM genetics, and that's where I truly specialize into human diagnostics. In fact, with all this said, I suppose that informatics for me is that it's the further comprehension of human genome for a diagnostic purpose. Although there are many kinds of bioinformatics, you can be an expert in proteins, in statistical analysis of animal populations, and so on. But for me, is that it's the patient and the human diagnostics.
Wow, it feels really important what you mentioned because usually in this podcast, and when we are talking about AI, we are talking about really huge things about computers, about ChatGPT, about models, but we forget that we are also machines, let's say, and the code that we have inside in the DNA and it has a lot of data in it, and how important it is to understand it and to being able to understand, for example, a disease from the genetics also. So what important things you are studying? Yeah.
Thank you. It's quite interesting. Yeah. Like you just said, we are walking data sets. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually like my first question, because from a person like me, for example, that is working usually with data, it's really hard to understand how do you extract data from a person, for example, from a DNA. I remember I studied a lot of things about DNA in school, but it feels strange how you, for example, use Python with this. So can you explain a little bit where do you extract the data from?
Well, the actual answer might be a bit complex, but I think I'm going to give a simplified version to make it easier to understand. Okay, so broadly speaking, we have two types of DNA in our body. We have the germline DNA, which is the one that you have in every cell of your body, and which is exactly in every cell of your body. It's the DNA that makes you, basically. And then we have the somatic DNA, which is the DNA that is only in certain specific parts or areas of your body. For example, a tumor contains somatic DNA. It has a unique mutation that differs from your germline DNA that is in all your cells, as I have just said. So having said that, I am going only to talk about the germline one, okay? So how do you get the genetic data from the DNA in a text format? Well, you take a blood sample, for example, from a patient, you subject it to a series of laboratory treatments, and you introduce it into a machine that is called a sequencer, that will give you one type of fluorometry or another, depending on the type of nucleotide you detect in the DNA. I don't know if you are familiar with the fact that the DNA is composed of 4 types of nucleotides that are represented with 4 letters that are GATC. So each type of letter, let's say, it will give a different light in this machine. Okay, so it's going to be translated to a text file with fragments of letters. This plain text file, it's called a FASTQ. And as I just said, it contains your DNA in fragments of maybe 150 letters, one line after the other, okay? So this text fragment, you don't know where they are located in the genome. So there's a next step here, which you need to perform an index, so-called index, that is called a reference genome. This process where you locate these fragments in the genome, it's called an alignment, okay? So with these human reference genomes models, these DNA fragments, we are going to infer that everything that is different from that index, it is considered a mutation. So in the final steps of this process, you will have a text file containing all the supposed mutations of an individual in question.
Okay, so you use this then for applying data analysis, I suppose, and just track information from this data file.
Exactly. There are 2 ways of treat this file. You have the genetic specialist from a hospital that analyze the data so you can diagnose the patient. And as you said, this is a data set that combined with a lot of individuals' DNA data set, you can analyze, you can extract information of them and so on.
Yeah, and yesterday when we were planning this episode, you mentioned that this data set is actually huge. Can you say like how big it is?
Is super huge. One genome contains about 2 million lines of supposed mutations in one individual. We can difference between a genome and an exome. An exome is like a little part of the genome, okay? It's the one that codes for proteins. Well, this exome has, in a white person, I'll go into that now, 120,000 mutations of
Wow.
lines, but in a genome it's about 2 million lines, only one individual. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
overwhelming.
I suppose that until these years that we have a lot of machine computational possibilities that before they weren't able to be done, I imagine that this analysis wasn't even able to imagine before because being so huge, it's really hard then for a computer to, for example, analyze and compare to other genomes and other references. So yeah, I guess that now it's the moment that we are starting being able, yeah, to analyze that
Today is the right time, yeah, because a few years ago I could see colleagues analyzing line by line,
by hand.
not by hand, but using Excel.
Wow, almost the same.
Exactly, almost the same.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, one important thing that you mentioned is the bias actually in the data. And one important thing I want to know, I imagine that this research about genome, about the human reference genome that you mentioned, that you compare with when you are understanding on one specific DNA from a person, it should be made maybe from one specific type of human. And is it maybe causing any kind of trouble or problem regarding this bias?
It does. That is actually, in my opinion, a very interesting topic because this reference genome, as you just said, is clearly created from the sequencing of white men. So when you are comparing your DNA data with this human reference genome, we'll have roughly 120,000 mutations. But however, if you analyze an African man, it contains about 180,000 mutation. And it's not that because it has a more apparent mutation just for being African. It's because the reference genome is not taking into account the mutation for ethnicities. We have unique mutations in each of us. So the idea would be to have one reference genome per ethnicity or even per country. In this way, the analysis of a mutation file by the genetic specialist could be much more convenient because not all mutations that are known to be specific to your ancestry would jump on the final mutation sheet. For example, in Finland, there is a reference genome specific to the Finnish population. And this population-specific frequency information is very valuable for the analysis of an individual that has a Finnish ancestry. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I would like to ask you what a mutation is, because I mean, this word, it reminds me, for example, to X-Men, but
Yeah.
I understand that hopefully, let's say, not all of the mutations are related to these superhuman facts. So can you say more or less what a mutation is? And like, I mean, if all the mutations, for example, conduct to a cancer, for example, or how it works? And I mean, is it normal to have mutations or yeah?
It's absolutely normal. We don't always call it mutation, we call it variant, so it's not so X-Men related. But everything that differs from these letters in the reference genome is called a variant or a mutation. Everything that makes you different from me is called a variant or a mutation in these nucleotides. We have to differ the ones that could cause a cancer, as you just said, or a rare disease, that the ones that simply make your eyebrow thicker, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, all of us are like variants, as you mentioned. It's like,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
so even to siblings, I mean, to brothers or to relatives, or I mean, we are different, so the genome should be different as well. Maybe not so
Exactly.
much different from, for example, if you take people from two different ethnics, but even though, I mean, that is natural. And also what you mentioned about the bias and the comparison, I guess that the effort of understanding which mutations are the natural ones from one country, for example, or one ethnic, and which ones are like the bad ones for example,
Mhm.
personalized medicine. I mean, the effort is going to be much higher if this data set that you are comparing with is biased.
Exactly. Once you have this variant sheet, the next task you need to perform is called an annotation. This annotation consists of supplementing each of your mutation with all of the information that is known about each one of them. We
Okay.
don't know everything about all of the mutations, but with these databases of all kinds of very useful information for the clinical, you can discern between these mutations that are just common in your population from the ones that it may be causing a disease. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important topic. Yes, of course. And
Yes.
and I think it's also to understand more the subject, because now I will ask you more about how this can be applied in the, let's say, in the real world, also in diseases, in medicine, and also in other things. So I think it's really important to understand how it works. And like we are talking about mutations, it's, for example, I mean, having green eyes or blue eyes or brown eyes. Like, I mean, it's there are some that are normal, and or even having different kinds of hair or something. So I mean, it's normal, but others maybe are not. And yeah, it's great to understand the differences. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, this brings the topic of the transition into general medicine to precision medicine. Ideally, we should all be aware of those mutations that could prevent us of some kind of problem. For example, there are some mutations that if you have them, you cannot take certain drugs. And yet many people are not aware of it. And despite the fact that in the leaflets of these drugs, they are warning about all these mutations, it's not usual to analyze the patient to solve this problem. This, in formation to personalized medicine, which is a goal of the very near future, should not happen. To give a real example, without going any further, I have a mutation that cause coagulation factors to not work properly, and I am more predisposed to have a clot in my body. So thanks to the fact that I know this fact, I avoid taking drugs that thicken the blood. Or if I, for example, I choose to get pregnant, I would have to be subjected to heparin injections. this is the actual end of personalized medicine, because not everything works for everyone based on our genetics.
Yeah, it is really great that, for example, this mutation that you have, because maybe if you didn't know that, the rule for most of people, maybe the probabilities that you have a problem are really low as well. But just having this in mind, and maybe if you have two different types of treatments, and one that is going to be more probable a problem for you in the future, you could choose and you can take the one that is better for you. Yeah, I mean, it's not like, okay, you need to change all your life because you have something or you have more probabilities to have something. It's just sometimes you can choose, and now it's like randomly that you choose one way or the other, and now you can choose because you have the data. And
Exactly, that's right.
yeah, it's really great actually, this metaphor, this analogy, because, for example, working in business intelligence, we say to the business, to directors sometimes, that they need to have the data to make decisions. So what an important thing to have also the data from your body, how it is, to make decisions of what do you eat, or, I mean, there are like many different things that are relevant in this topic. Yes.
Yeah, yes, they are. For example, with this thing, the coagulation factor thing, it's actually quite common. It's a mutation of 2% of the population have that. It's common. More than 1%, it's common. Okay. So there are many people that could take advantage of knowing it. Specifically women, the contraceptive pill thickens your blood. And there are a lot of rumors of women getting clots because of these contraceptive pills, but the most possible explanation is that they have the same mutation as me. It's very, very common.
Yeah. And I wonder, how can a person know about the DNA, about, I mean, how did you test it yourself, for example? Or, I mean, is it open to everyone? Is there any like a company that gives you a possibility to analyze your DNA? How does it work actually?
Well, in Spain, you can't just analyze your DNA and look into it because it needs to be controlled by a specialist. This, in my opinion, this topic about having your genome or not is actually a problem. Do you know, for example, these companies that can tell you if you are 25% Irish or 33% Indian or whatever? These types have been fashionable for some years now. I think they have certain risks. Not all of them, but those where they need a sample of your blood, what can happen is that instead of consulting only those specific physicians that give you information about your ancestry, in this case, they can extract all your DNA, and the DNA is your real ID. That's very valuable information. That is not the problem. The problem is that there are already known cases in the United States of people who, because imagine your father took one of these tests, got all the DNA, and they sold that DNA information to life insurance company. So now you go to try and get a life insurance, and they won't give it to you because they detected in your father a heart hypertrophy mutation that gives you life expectancy of 50 years, for example. So about the question of the user having its own genome, I don't recommend it. You need to be tested by a specialist. As I said, in Spain, you need to be sick or have a probably genetic disease to be tested. But the future should be that your doctor could make that analysis for you and keep the data for you and inform you, because there are many mutations that are predispositions to, for example, certain type of cancer that it may not appear in all your life, but could make you worry or could make you take bad decisions about it. It's a sensitive topic.
Yes, it is actually. And also the ethics. How do we keep this data? And yes, you mentioned this direct to customer genetic testing, companies that offers these possibilities to know your descendants and the countries they are coming from. It is more and more popular every day. I have seen it a lot of times in TikTok, for example. And that's true that we are giving a lot of information with the DNA that maybe we're not aware of. I think that in the European Union, but I mean, I'm not sure because that's quite an interesting topic. And if someone listening this knows more details, please let us know. But I think that due to the GDPR, It is supposed to be the DNA information. It is supposed to be a personal information, as for example, I don't know, your Google account information and your mobile information about the places you have visited in. And I mean, these things, they are supposed to be really relevant, are really sensitive, and they should be protected. So I don't know if it's legal or not. I suppose it's not to do this process in the European Union, at least. But maybe there are unethical companies, or as you mentioned, some of them that could potentially have this information and sell this, or even that maybe there is a hacker or something that could steal this information from this company. So the fact of privacy and security is more and more interesting regarding these genetics. And I don't know if, for example, AI could help us to have this information safer. I don't know if you have some opinion about how new technologies could help us to protect this.
About everything you said, the current solution to this for these companies that sell your information and stuff is that they go with it anonymously. I mean, they don't sell the mutations of one individual in particular. They mix it all over. They make a huge data set of millions of variants, and you cannot know which one belongs to what person and which one to the other person. So this is more or less a solution for the GDPR because, as you said, it's level 1 security data, the DNA, the most valuable information there is. With this said, I know or I've heard of companies that they get track this particular information of each individual, and they also sell it. Because if you sell genetic information, not only with the mutations, with anything more, but with the phenotype are the sign of and symptoms of a person. I mean, it has the autism, it has big nose, things like this. If you sell these mutations with the phenotype information, it's more valuable. So there are some companies that sell it in not the most anonymous way.
They could be stolen as well. I mean,
Yeah, it could perfectly be stolen. Yeah. The genetic companies are target for it because it costs, I don't know how much it costs, but thousands and thousands of euros. A huge data set of genetic information. It's money nowadays, and it will be more money in the future. So yeah. Yeah, but the question of how AI could help in the security, in my opinion, for a more ethical use of this data, I don't know about artificial intelligence in this matter, but I think it should be under the protection of the public health system. Just like the medical records, this could ensure that your data is kept hidden and secure, and you could have the information whenever you want. And like I said, I don't know about security with artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence is very important for the analyzing of this data. That is where I can talk about. What we have talked about so far is not so much related to artificial intelligence, but it's a good introduction to the fact that, like I said before, we move from generalist medicine to personalized or precision medicine, but the future would be predictive medicine. And we don't have the information to be there yet, but with all the knowledge that we have now, we could train models with artificial intelligence that could detect or help us detect new biomarkers that are associated, for example, with autism. Imagine we have this huge data set annotated with all the databases associated with autism, containing all the genes currently known to be associated with autism, with all the chromosomal positions annotated, whether the mutations are at one end of the gene, are in the middle of the gene, are next of which nucleotide, the behavior of these chromosomes will affect the metabolic pathways, a lot of information that is related to that mutations. I know for a fact that today it's already happening. There are artificial intelligence models that, based on the conclusions reached with all the information that we trained them with, could help us detect these new targets to study. This would mean saving money on research because you'll need to do the functional experiments to validate this mutation afterwards. But it will mean saving money. So you don't spend your time in maybe some investigation that doesn't give the results that you were expecting. Another interesting example of AI not only analyzing the mutation data and extracting new targets, it's an app that is currently being used, and it's called Face to Gene. It's an app that, with a picture of a patient, because we usually perform a genetic analysis in patients that are affected by rare diseases. And these diseases have some very huge phenotypes and signs and symptoms, very remarkable. So with a picture of a patient, the model analyzes it and it gives you an approximation of what the model thinks is the disease affecting the patient. Because a lot of rare diseases are very similar to each other, but they are not the same. So the drug that they could take to feel better is not the same. The medical recommendations are not the same, but not every doctor can diagnose a patient at a glance. It's very difficult. I think the name of the algorithm of the phase 2 gene is called Deep Gestalt.
Wow. All of these things have a lot of value, actually, Marta, and the future or even the present is going to be impacted a lot with this innovation. And I hope that it could be really helpful because, as you mentioned, this change from like ordinary health or general health, as you mentioned, to a really personalized health already is a huge step. But what about predictive health? Because imagine that no one else in the future is going to have a really, for example, massive cancer because all of these predictive models could predict whenever it's going to start. So the diagnosis would be much more efficient and quick. And wow, it should be really a huge step for the humanity. So I hope that everything works well and soon. And wow, amazing, amazing, Marta.
Yeah, I hope that too. Actually, an example of the current situation, more than 90% of the breast cancers are produced because of a single mutation. And if you have it, you are going to have breast cancer. So having that analyzed, because you have records of family that have breast cancer, could make you take away your breast and prevent having a cancer. This is currently one specific case, but in the future, with more information, with more targets predicted by AI models that help us investigate, could be for more cancers, not for all, because a cancer is a very complex disease. It's not as simple as one mutation, so they give you the disease, but it could help the life of a lot of people. Yeah.
Yes, and even, I mean, if you need to do a surgery, the sooner the better. Because, as you
Exactly.
mentioned, if you do a predictive surgery, maybe, or you know that you could have a problem, so you do tests frequently. So you are analyzing this part of your body because you know that you could have something soon. It's really helpful. Yeah. And it changes how everything works because now it's differently. It's you need to wait until you have symptoms, usually to go to the doctor, hospital, and all of this process, and then they try to heal you. And it's great, this process also. And of course, it's going to be always this kind of processes because, as you mentioned, not all the cancers, all the diseases are going to be predicted. Even though if we could predict a 10% or something like that, it's a huge change. So I hope that everything,
Absolutely.
yeah, I hope that everything will continue this way. And it's really, really insightful.
Thank you. I'm glad that you see it that way because it's very promising for the
Mm,
future, this
mm.
area. Yeah.
Okay, so just a few more questions because we have been talking a lot, but I think this episode has a lot of value, so it's great. But which advice, for example, would you give a person that maybe now has listened to the episode and now is thinking about how pursuing a career in genetics, in personalized medicine? Is it possible? How this person should do?
It depends. If this is a data science background, the one interested, maybe you need to study genetics if you want to enter personalized medicine. And if you are interested in biology, you were already interested in genetics, you need to learn to program. I would say Python, actually, because it has many libraries associated with or based in biological models. And an average use of Unix, you need to know, of course, but you have to update yourself of the genetics of the current times because this is something that you have to keep studying. But I think maybe it's not the best opinion, but for me, the most important thing is that you have to understand that this is something that you do for real patients, that this data analyzed, it may involve saving lives, and you have to be aware of that, and you have to be methodical with the analysis because what you do, it could change one person's life. So I think that the most important skill is to be empathetic and to be aware of the work you are doing.
Yeah, hopefully you are. So
I, I
it's
think
great.
I think I am. I think I am.
Okay, so now to conclude, I usually ask two questions to the guests that are in this podcast. So the first one is, how do you like coffee? And the second one is, how may the audience contact you?
My coffee, well, I like a latte with milk at room temperature. And the audience may contact me through LinkedIn, Marta Carcajona, or using my email, which is marta.carcajona@gmail.com.
Okay, I will put all of the links and your email as part of the notes of the episode, so don't worry about that. And thank you, Marta. It has been really, really a great conversation about genetics. I have learned a lot, and I hope also the audience did. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. It's been a very, very nice experience.
Thank you. Thanks for being here one more week. If you liked it, please subscribe to the podcast and to the newsletter in alejandroperezperez.com. Please share both with your friends and relatives, and don't forget to give me 5 stars in Apple Podcast and Spotify. See you next week. Bye bye.